All right, I've got a great guest for you today. I have lawyer Alan Dershowitz to weigh in on what's going on with Donald Trump, Colorado, the presidential election, as well as the Israel-Hamas situation. Alan, thank you so much for being on the show.
I'm looking forward to being interviewed by you. Thank you.
Thank you. So, as you know, lots going on. This morning, there was the official petition of the U.S. Supreme Court to rule that Donald Trump should be removed from the ballot. At the same time, the Republican Party of Colorado has countered that, asking them to intervene and remove this situation. What are your thoughts on the entire Colorado ballot situation?
It's one of the most undemocratic and anti-American actions I've seen in my 60 years of practicing law. Taking a candidate off the ballot, telling millions of Coloradans that they can't vote against Donald Trump, as I would if I were living there, or for him if they want to vote for him. My colleague, Professor Tribe, wrote an essay the other day. It was so absurd, saying it's very democratic to take somebody off the ballot because if the person doesn't believe in democracy, then they should be taken off the ballot. I mean, that's what banana republics do. That's what Stalin used to do, take his opponents off the ballot. That's what Putin does. That's not what Americans do. If you have good reasons for voting against Donald Trump, and I do, then you exercise your right to vote. I want to see this election be the cleanest and fairest in American history. And I want to see Donald Trump defeated soundly and honestly without the ability to complain about it. But don't give him reasons to complain. Don't take him off ballots. I think the Supreme Court will see through this, will take the case, and will probably restore him to the ballot. But there are no assurances. No one can ever predict how a court will behave. It's a misreading of the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment, which was drafted by radical Lincoln Republican Reconstructionists, obviously didn't want to give the decision who should be the next president to the states, because the states would be Virginia, South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, the very states that seceded. So they put under Article 5 of the 14th Amendment the power to enforce the disqualification solely in the hands of Congress. They told essentially the Colorado Supreme Court, butt your nose out of this. We don't want your involvement. We don't want you to make up rules for what constitutes insurrection. We don't want you to make up rules as to whether you need a conviction previously. That's up to Congress. This is not self-enforcing. You can't disqualify somebody without knowing what the procedure is. And Congress has never set up a procedure. So here you have a situation where even before there's a trial of Donald Trump, a court, 7 people in a 4-3 vote, take him off the ballot, claiming the Fourth Amendment. It's a complete misreading of the 14th Amendment.
Thank you for that. That law is, if I remember correctly, 155 years old. Trump was not an officer during that time. He, nobody in his family was around the Civil War. So if they go ahead and they rule in favor of Trump remaining on the ballot, is there also an opportunity to maybe redo that law as far as changing that, or would they just leave that alone on the books?
Well, it would be easy for Congress to enforce the law. And what Congress ought to do is say, look, we have to decide whether or not the 14th Amendment was even intended to be applicable in future elections. There's a reading of the 14th Amendment that says, no, it was limited in time only to people who fought in the Civil War. After all, the same 14th Amendment talks about retiring the debt of the Civil War. It talks about enslaved people. It's obviously time-bound. But if Congress were to decide that it applies to current elections, then they have to set up procedures. You need to have a trial. You need to have a verdict. You need to have an opportunity to appeal. All these procedures have to be set up. You need to define what an insurrection means. Did an insurrection include what Black Lives Matter did on the West Coast after the killing of George Floyd? Does it include what's going on in New York now, where anti-Israel people are trying to block access to the airport, trying to block access to courthouses? Those insurrections? Is the failure to close the border to illegal immigrants and insurrection. Everybody has their own definitions, and the 14th Amendment allocates only to Congress the power to do that, not to the states.
Okay, and so Trump at this point has not been convicted of any kind of insurrection crime. You're also saying that this word insurrection is too ambiguous. Had the second impeachment against Trump gone through and the Senate voted to impeach him, would that have counted as towards an insurrection crime, or does that not count either?
No, it wouldn't count. Why? Because the impeachment provisions of the Constitution, the body of the Constitution itself, provide that the Senate can vote not only to impeach, but also to disqualify in the future. And so the Senate had the power to disqualify Trump in the future. But if they had decided to convict him of insurrection, but failed to disqualify him, I would still argue the 14th Amendment was not intended to circumvent the impeachment provisions of the Constitution itself. It would have been a stronger case, obviously, but they voted to acquit.
Okay. And then I'm seeing West Virginia, Michigan, a few other states. They have just recently ruled that they believe Trump does have the right to be voted in or out of office by the American people. As the Supreme Court takes up this case or rejects it, would those other states, would that be precedents for how they make a decision, or are they going to simply look at the Constitution and this law and make their own decision?
No, the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution gives the federal government, and in this case, the Supreme Court, the final word. So if the Supreme Court says it's not applicable, then no state can do it. Now, the Supreme Court may say, well, it could be applicable if A, B, and C happen, or if there is a conviction. And if Jack Smith were to then indict him for insurrection and he would be convicted, unlikely that could happen before the election, then maybe the arguments would change. I would still take the position that the 14th Amendment was never intended to disqualify somebody running for president. The word president isn't even mentioned in the 14th Amendment. So I would take the position that even if there were conviction, but absent a conviction, absent even an indictment, he's never been indicted for insurrection. Jack Smith could easily have gotten an indictment for insurrection. He didn't do it. So it's the weakest possible case now to present to the Supreme Court on behalf of those who would take him off the ballot. So I am fairly confident, although I never make predictions of the Supreme Court, I'm fairly confident the Supreme Court may even 9-0, even possibly 9-0, say that the 14th Amendment does not apply to the situation.
Okay. Speaking of Jack Smith, I see in my comments section often that trying to gag Donald Trump during his trials is election interference. I see where people are saying that because this is a huge celebrity, court case. But is it normal to try to gag somebody during a case like this, or is this just uncharted territory and they're making their best decisions going forward?
It's actually charted territory. The courts have said, no, you can't gag people any more than absolutely necessary. Because remember, the First Amendment has two elements. It's my right to speak, but it's your right to listen to me. And so what they're not only denying Donald Trump the right to speak, they're denying millions of people the right to hear him and listen to him and judge him in the marketplace of ideas. And so I think Jack Smith has gone too far. And I think the judge in the DC case has gone too far. And if you're going to have a gag order, it should only be a restriction on intimidating witnesses. You should be able to say the judge is the son of a whatever. You should be able to say his law clerks are too. If they want to sue you for defamation, fine. But the fact that you're a presumed innocent defendant shouldn't restrict your free speech rights and the right of others to listen to your free speech.
Okay. Final Trump question, then I want to move on to Israel. You've represented Donald Trump in the past. So has Attorney Jay Sekulow. He's now the one leading the charge for the Colorado Republicans. And he has said, listen, those 10 electoral votes in Colorado will likely go to a Democrat. But if we lose this fight for people to vote for whom they want, we lose our constitutional republic. What are your thoughts on his words?
First, he's a great lawyer, and he's absolutely right. I'm glad I didn't know this. I'm glad you told me this. I didn't know that Jay was involved in this case. You couldn't get a better lawyer than Jay. He and I worked together on the first impeachment, but he's really an excellent constitutional lawyer, and he's 100% right in his analysis. And I hope he wins.
Okay, great. So you have a new book out, War Against the Jews: How to End Hamas Barbarism. This has been a bloody conflict, casualties, unfortunately, collateral damage victims. How does Israel go about getting rid of Hamas without losing the PR battle with the rest of the world?
Well, first, you should not only look at the front of my book, but you should look at the back of my book, which has a cartoon. I think you can see it. And it summarizes what's going on in Gaza completely. It has an Israeli soldier protecting a baby carriage, and it has the Hamas terrorist using the baby carriage to protect the soldier. And that's the difference, the moral difference and the legal difference. For example, let's assume I go to rob a bank, and the police start shooting at me, and I start shooting, and I start killing tellers and killing customers. And then I grab you as a hostage, and I hold you in front of me, and I keep shooting and killing people. And a brave policeman, in an attempt to stop the killing, tries to shoot and kill me, but by accident, kills you. Who is responsible in law for your death? Not the cop whose bullet went into your heart and killed you, but me, who was holding you because I was using you as a human shield. And by the same score, Hamas is responsible for the death of every single human shield that they use. And what they do is they embed their rockets, their tunnels, their commanders in the most highly populated populations. I'll give you an example of what they do. Israel says, here's a 5-block area that we are not going to attack or bomb. Please, Gazan civilians, go to this 5-block area and you will be safe. What do you think happens? Hamas goes to that 5-block area, deliberately fires rockets from that 5-block safe area, and says to the Israelis, all right, you have two choices. Either you can't stop us, we'll continue to send the rockets, or you're going to have to try to stop us and thereby kill civilians in what you declared to be a safe zone. So that's what Hamas does. And it is one of the most difficult wars. I think it was General Clark who said this was the most difficult war any democracy could ever fight. First, you have the 200 and so hostages. Then you have these thousands of human shields. And there's one other point that the media doesn't ever make. At the same time that, according to Hamas health authorities, 22,000 Gazans have been killed. By the way, they don't distinguish between combatants, so half of them may be terrorists. But at the same time, the 22,000 Gazans have been killed. The media never reports on the fact that hundreds of thousands of Muslims have been killed by other Muslims in Yemen, 300,000 or so, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria. But you never see a dead baby on television unless the death or the injury can be blamed on Israel. You never see pictures of these dead babies who have been killed by other Muslims. And so it's such selective media attention. And who wouldn't cry over a dead baby? Of course you cry over a dead baby, but you have to ask the question, whose fault is that baby's death? And if the baby is used as a human shield, you have to blame at least part of the blame. A share of the blame has to go to Hamas.
Yeah, gosh. I've never heard of a war where people will openly use their children, their wives, their daughters. It's such a bizarre thing. It's been very difficult to report as honestly as possible on the situation. I did want to ask you, in your estimation, this swelling of support for Palestine in the streets, interrupting Christmas, interrupting Hanukkah, spilling over into all the major universities, is this because of innocent people being caught in the crossfire and people think that they're doing good by bringing this to the attention of the American people? Or is this more out of ignorance and not fully understanding Hamas and the tactics that they're using against Israel to make Israel look bad?
You could have written the article that I wrote today about who are the people in these demonstrations. The first thing you have to remember is the people who organized these demonstrations started to organize them on the afternoon of October 7th, before the bodies were even removed from the horrible barbarism. They took full force on October 8th, before Israel fired a single shot, before a single soldier. And who are the people who organized these demonstrations? They're professional revolutionaries, the Democratic Socialists of America. We used to call them communists. They were people who would hook themselves onto every cause, whether it be the civil rights movement, the gay rights movement, every movement. They don't care about those movements. They just want to see revolution. They want to see the government of the United States overthrown. That's the group that organizes it, and it's very well funded. The other group that joins are, of course, radical Muslims. The third group are traditional hardcore anti-Semites of the right and the left that have always said Jews are to blame for everything. And the fourth group, the most numerous and the most interesting, are the useful idiots, the college students who have no idea, who don't know the difference between Palestine and the Palisades, who wouldn't know which river and which sea they were talking about. Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. You have not seen a single sign. I challenge anybody to come up with a single sign at a single demonstration that calls for a Palestinian state, that calls for the two-state solution. Not a single sign. So these are not pro-Palestine demonstrations. These are pro-Hamas demonstrations. Hamas doesn't want a two-state solution. These are anti-Israel demonstrations. They're not pro-Palestine demonstrations, though there are some useful idiots who think that they're demonstrating for a ceasefire. If a ceasefire, remember there was a 6-day pause, a 6-day ceasefire. The demonstration only increased during that period of time. If there were a complete ceasefire and Israel were to completely leave Gaza, you would still have these demonstrations calling for the end of Israel. So the ceasefire is a way of getting useful idiots to join in the demonstrations, but the core of the demonstrations are not pro-Palestine, they're anti-Israel. And in my book, The War Against the Jews, I document that. I show when it started, how it started, who's funding, who's paying, and what the dynamics of this thing really are. These kids, including children of friends of mine who are participating in these demonstrations, often have no idea what they're doing.
Yeah. I heard someone the other day, they asked about the two-state solution. They said, of course I'm open to that. Give all the land back to Palestine and move all the Jews to New York and Florida because there's too many of them there already, right? It was like, it was a slap in the face while saying, oh yeah, we're open to this two-state solution. But the solution is always get rid of the Jews.
Yeah.
Get rid of the Jews. And so then that's a one-state solution, right?
Yeah, and it won't be a state; it'll be a caliphate. And believe me, Hamas would never be satisfied, even if they got rid of Israel. It's coming to a theater near you. Remember that Hamas is a surrogate of Iran. Iran regards the United States as the big devil. Israel is the small devil. If they, God forbid, would manage to get rid of Israel, they're coming after Western democracies. Already there are Hamas cells in European countries. Several people have been arrested from them. And I am 100% certain that among the illegal immigrants that are crossing over the border in Texas, there are Hamas plants, and they will have useful idiots, college students, who will join them the way they did in 1970s when the communists again organized the Weathermen and organized these other radical organizations that tried to blow up universities. They tried to blow up Fort Dix. They killed people. And these were ordinary American college students who became a fifth column. I think that would happen in the United States too. So the fight that Israel is fighting is a fight not only for Israel's survival, it's a fight for the survival of Western democracy.
Yeah. Iran opened up yesterday and admitted that they were behind supplying intel against Israel and also the funding for Hamas. We've known this, but they finally admitted it. But they said it was because of the attack from Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu against General Soleimani. But according to Trump, Netanyahu pulled out the night before, and it was solely Trump's decision to go after them. But do you think because of that connection against their top perceived general, that was the reason behind that? Or were they always just wanting to take Israel out at any chance?
There's no question that they only wanted to take Israel out. Look, the planning for the barbarism of October 7th began well before the Soleimani thing. It's years and years and years in planning. And remember, Iran is responsible for killing Americans in the barracks in Lebanon. They were responsible back in the 1990s for the blowing up of a Jewish community center in Argentina. They always look for excuses. Even the October 7th, they said, oh, there were some Jews up at the Temple Mount. And that was the reason, because there were a couple of Jews on the Temple Mount praying against Israeli law, by the way. That's why we killed 1,200 people, beheaded babies, and burned people and raped women. They always can come up with an excuse. But these are things that are well planned, well organized, well financed by Iran. Iran has declared war against the United States. It attacked an American soldiers the other day. It seriously injured one. The United States would have full legal authority under the laws of war now to react, not in the minor way it has, but in a major way by destroying Iran's nuclear arsenal's capacity. Can you imagine on October 7th if terrorists were armed with a dirty bomb or a tactical nuclear weapon? They would use it. And Iran will give nuclear weapons to their surrogates. And that's why Iran cannot be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon. And even though Israel has been weakened by these recent events and Netanyahu has been weakened, I don't care who the prime minister is. It could be the head of the peace movement. If Iran is about to develop a nuclear weapon, the Israelis are going to destroy it. And I hope they'll do it with the support of the United States. Both countries have justification because both countries have been victims of acts of war by Iran against their countries.
Yeah. All right. Final question. I appreciate you coming on. It seems a lot of blame for this event is being thrown at the feet of Israel. For example, Israel is being blamed for cutting off all water to Palestine. But as you dig into these articles, Israel provides less than 10% of the water to Gaza. The article says Hamas chose not to use UN funding and supplies to dig wells and desalinize water, but instead chose to dig military tunnels and use these very pipes as rockets against Israel. Why does the media poison the truth like this, where they start to set up what's going on in Gaza, but then they throw it at the feet of Israel?
They do that. They always do that. How many times have you heard on television that Israel actually ended the occupation in 2005? They left behind the hothouses and other farm implements. They left behind the ability to build desalination plants. Gaza could have been turned into Singapore in the Mediterranean, but then the Hamas, in a bloody coup, took over, killed Palestinian Authority, and became billionaires, the heads. There are, I think, 6 of them who are worth $1 billion, live in Qatar. Some live in South Africa. Some live in Turkey. And the answer has been poverty-stricken Gaza, not the fault of Israel. Israel, once it gave up the occupation, it didn't even control the borders for a while until Hamas took over and started sending rockets into Israel. Only then did it take control over everything and build fences and build reactions to the tunnels. So it's all Hamas's fault, and the poverty in Gaza is Hamas's fault. But if it bleeds, it leads, and if you can blame it on Israel, you're going to get half the world supporting you. So the media has applied this terrible double standard right from the beginning, and we're seeing it spreading to universities now, to my own university, Harvard University, and we're seeing a double standard, and people forget that if you attack what Israel stands for, you're essentially attacking what America stands for. Israel is the only country in the Middle East has democracy, separation of church and state, free speech, free elections. Or they have 5 elections in 7 years or something like that. What could be more democratic than that? A free press. And the only place, by the way, today where Christians are thriving is in Israel. Christians have been thrown out of Gaza. They've been thrown out of Bethlehem. They've been thrown out of many parts of the West Bank. But Christians are thriving in Nazareth and in other parts of Israel where Christian Arabs serve in the highest roles in the Supreme Court, in universities, in medical schools, etc. So if you're a Christian Arab, there's only one place you want to live in the Middle East, and that's Israel.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much, Alan, for coming on, keeping us in the loop on what's going on with the Donald Trump situation, also with the Israel situation. If people want to follow you, what is the best way to do that? And I'm going to put a link down below to War Against the Jews, How to End Hamas Barbarism. Do you want people to go to your YouTube channel, or what's the best way to follow you?
Best way is I do have a podcast Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday at 5:30, but you can access it anytime, and it gets a lot of viewers. Not as many as your podcast, but it's doing well. And I'm on 3 days a week, and you can watch me there. I also have a Substack, and obviously, I'd love you to get my book. You can get it in Amazon.com or the places where books are sold. So I appreciate the opportunity to express my views, and I want to wish everybody Happy New Year. I hope next year is better for the world, for the United States, for Israel, for Muslims and Jews. Let there be peace.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to put a direct link to your book down below and also to your channel. Thank you so much. Happy rest of the holiday and a happy new year. Thank you again.
Thank you. You too.